Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today, we're looking at the life of Dr. Sai Garte. Now, this is a man who was born into a family of third-generation militant atheists. We're talking card-carrying Communist Party members. He becomes a PhD biochemist, and he's fully expecting science to be the final nail in God's coffin. But instead, the sheer mind-bending complexity of the cell. It gives him chills. He just can't explain. We're going to cover how quantum physics, the total failure of chemical evolution, and two really mysterious dreams turned a strict materialist into a believer.
It's just a remarkable turnaround, isn't it? I mean, the story we're usually sold, the cultural script, is that you grow up with faith, you learn science, and then you kind of evolve out of religion.
Right, you get smarter and leave it behind.
Exactly. Sai Garte's life is a complete inversion of that. And what makes this deep dive so critical is that his transition wasn't, triggered by some tragedy or an emotional crisis. It started as a rigorous intellectual dismantling of his own atheism, using the very science he was told disproved God.
That is exactly why I wanted to unpack this today, because his background,
Yeah.
it isn't just secular, it was actively hostile to faith.
Oh, absolutely.
Sai calls himself a red diaper baby. His parents were members of the American Communist Party back in the 1930s. His father was a chemist. So in their household, you didn't just ignore God, you actively understood that God was a delusion.
Right. The worldview there is, well, it's dialectical materialism. It basically says that matter is the only thing that's real. History, emotion, society, it's all just matter in motion. So growing up, Sai just assumed religious people were, uneducated or maybe weak-minded.
And he went into chemistry to be a chip off the old block.
He did. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, view the universe through that strict, unyielding materialist lens.
Okay, so he heads to college, totally armed with this rigid atheism. He's studying chemistry, but then he runs into his first hurdle, and it's physics. Specifically quantum mechanics. Now, I know our listeners might glaze over to quantum, but why was this such a problem for his worldview?
Well, because strict materialism really relies on determinism. It relies on the universe being sort of a giant, predictable clock. If you know where every gear is and how fast it's spinning, you can predict exactly what happens next. It's comforting in a way. It makes the universe a machine.
A machine you can understand.
But when Sai started studying quantum mechanics, that machine, well, it broke. He learned about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. He learned that at the most fundamental level of reality, things are probabilistic, not deterministic. And then there's the observer effect, the idea that the observer is somehow linked to the reality of the particle.
So the universe wasn't this hard, cold machine. It was weird.
It was strange, that's the word he uses. It was fuzzy. It just didn't fit the rigid box his communist upbringing had built for him. Sai saw that the universe at its core simply didn't behave the way a materialist manifesto said it should. That was the first crack in the fortress.
But he doesn't convert right there. He basically just goes, okay, physics is weird, and then pivots to his real passion, which is biochemistry. He wants to understand the chemistry of life. And this is where he describes a moment that gave him, literal chills.
The chill moment. Yes, this is pivotal. He was in graduate school, and he's studying the mechanism of protein synthesis. Now, to really appreciate this, you have to understand that protein synthesis is basically the manufacturing floor of life. It's how your DNA code gets read and then turned into
the functional machines, the proteins that actually do all the work in your body.
Exactly, the machines that make you work. And it's not just chemicals bumping into each other.
Not at all.
It is an incredibly complex, coordinated dance. You've got the DNA storage, the RNA messenger, the ribosome, which is like a factory, and then transfer molecules bringing in specific amino acids in a very specific order. Sai is just sitting there learning about this intricate chain of command, and he felt a physical shiver go right down his spine. And he asked himself a question that a materialist is not supposed to ask. How did this get here?
Because it just looks designed.
It looks overwhelmingly designed. Now, at the time, Sai did what most secular scientists do to protect their worldview. He told himself, well, evolution explains it all. It's sort of the standard safety net, right?
Just get out of jail free card.
Exactly. If you see complexity, you just wave the wand of natural selection and the problem just goes away.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, Sai didn't stop there. As he dug deeper into the science of origins, he realized that evolution is actually a very loaded term. He found this massive wall between biological evolution and chemical evolution.
And this is the most critical distinction in this entire discussion, honestly. It's the one that gets glossed over the most in textbooks. Sai realized you have to separate Darwinian evolution from abiogenesis, the origin of life, from non-life.
Okay, let's break that down because I think for most people, it's all just lumped under science. So why can't Darwin explain the very first cell?
Because Darwinian evolution, it needs three things: replication, mutation, and natural selection. You need a living cell that can make a copy of itself. Sometimes that copy has a mistake, that's a mutation. And if that mistake helps it survive, natural selection keeps it. That's how you get from a simple cell to, say, a complex animal.
Okay, makes sense.
But here's the problem. Chemical evolution is the process of getting from, dead rocks and a soup of chemicals to that first living, replicating cell.
And dead chemicals don't reproduce.
Exactly. Chemicals do not care if they survive. A pool of amino acids has zero drive to become a cell. There is no natural selection acting on dead matter. And Sai realized that to get from a soup of chemicals to a functioning, self-replicating cell, that's a gap that standard chemistry just can't cross.
He brings up a statistic here that is it's mind-blowing. He talks about the accuracy of cellular replication. He says living cells self-replicate with 99.99999% accuracy.
That's 6 nines of reliability. And Sai's point is that nothing else in the known universe does that. Crystals don't do it. Machines don't do it. A car cannot build another car from scratch. Pure chemical reactions definitely don't do it. They just degrade into tar if you leave them alone.
Right.
Sai realized that a self-repairing, self-replicating information processing system doesn't just happen through random collisions.
He even brings up the chemist Jim Tour here.
Yeah.
And Jim Tour is, well, he's famous for being really aggressive on this point. Tour basically says if any scientist tells you we're close to creating life in the lab, they're lying.
Or at the very least, they're not informed about the specific challenges. Sai found that the leaders in the field of origin of life research, when you talk to them privately, off the record, they admit they are completely stuck. They aren't getting long, functional DNA strands. They're just getting chemical junk.
So for Sai, that was the breaking point.
It was. He realized that saying evolution did it for the origin of life was not a scientific statement. It was a gap filler. It was a faith statement for atheists.
So this is huge. He realizes that the materialist explanation for life, that it just sort of popped out of the mud by accident, is scientifically bankrupt. So he didn't start believing in God yet, but he stopped being an atheist.
He became an agnostic. And it's so important to note, he got there purely on the science. The data drove him to the conclusion that strict materialism was false. He was just left with this giant question mark.
So he's sort of floating in this agnostic space. Science has brought him to the door, but it hasn't opened it. He knows what isn't true, but he doesn't know what is true.
Yeah.
And then the social barriers start to crumble. A friend invites him to church.
Oh, yeah.
And knowing his background, communist parents, militant atheism, you can just imagine the internal panic.
He was terrified. He admits he thought he'd been lied to his whole life about what Christianity was, but that kind of programming runs deep. He walked into that church fully expecting the caricature. He expected a red-faced priest screaming about sin and hellfire and judgment and the lake of fire.
And instead, he walks into a Catholic church run by Franciscans. I just love the visual there. The brown robes, the rope belts. It's very old school.
It is. But the sermon, it wasn't about judgment at all. It was entirely about love.
Yeah,
just love.
That must have been a huge shock to the system.
It just shattered his stereotype. He realized that the angry Christian narrative was a construct he had accepted without any evidence. He'd been skeptical of God, sure, but he hadn't been skeptical of his own prejudices.
And that openness led him to finally try reading the Bible. And interestingly, he approached it like a scientist.
Yeah, he says the Old Testament left him a bit cold at first. He couldn't really connect with it. But then he read the Gospel of Matthew and then the Book of Acts.
The Book of Acts. That's a great entry point for a mind like his.
Absolutely. It's written by Luke, who is a physician. The style is very precise. It reads like a historical record or a travelogue. This happened, then Peter went here, then this event occurred. Sai said it struck him as factual history, not mythology. It felt like a record of things that actually happened.
So let's pause and just look at where he is. He's intellectually engaging with the text. He's seen the complexity in the cell that points to a designer. But he's still not there yet. He hasn't crossed the line into faith. And this is where the story gets really, really personal. It stops being about biochemistry and starts being about the subconscious.
This is where we see the limits of reason. Logic can get you to agnosticism. It can get you to admit that a creator is possible or even probable. But faith is a relational step. You don't have a relationship with a hypothesis. For Sai, that push came through his dreams.
He describes two specific dreams that are incredibly vivid. I want to recount the first one because it really sets the stage. He dreams he's hanging from a cliff. He's terrified. He's just dangling over the edge, can't pull himself up. He screams for help, not even knowing who he's asking for.
And he hears a voice, and the voice says, just let go.
Which is pretty much the worst advice if you're hanging off a cliff.
Logically, yes, it's terrible advice. And Sai argues with the voice in the dream. He's like, are you crazy? I'll fall, I'll die. But the voice just insists, just let go. Finally, out of sheer exhaustion, he can't hold on any longer. He gives up, he lets go.
And here's the twist. The moment he lets go, the entire world shifts 90 degrees. He wasn't hanging vertically, he was lying on the ground.
Yeah.
He was safe the whole time.
It is such a powerful metaphor for that intellectual resistance to faith. Sai later interpreted this as Jesus telling him to let go of his baggage, his pride, his upbringing, his fear of what his scientific peers would think. We often cling to our skepticism because we think it's keeping us safe.
When really it's just keeping us stuck.
That's it. He thought he was holding on for dear life, but he was really just refusing to stand on solid ground.
There was a second dream too, right? The walled garden.
Yes. He dreams he's outside this beautiful garden with high, imposing walls, and he's trying to climb the vines. He's struggling. He's slipping. It's this intense, effort-based attempt to get in. Then a man appears and asks him, what's the matter? And Sai says he can't get in, and the man just simply says, use the door.
Use the door.
Sai walks over, opens the door, and walks right in. And later, at the church he started attending, he saw a painting of Jesus knocking on a door. It's a reference to Revelation 3.2, and he realized that the man in the dream was showing him that access to God isn't about climbing impossible intellectual walls or striving. It's about entering through the door that's already been opened for you.
That's just wild, especially since he hadn't even read that verse yet.
Precisely. These experiences moved him from God is a rigorous scientific hypothesis to God is a reality I can know.
So now, Dr. Sai is a Christian. He's written books, he's speaking on channels like Capturing Christianity. But I want to talk about his current view on science and atheism, because there's this persistent myth, we hear it all the time, that you have to choose. You can have science or you can have faith. Pick one.
And Sai is just the living proof that you should reject that choice. In fact, he argues that Christianity was actually instrumental in the foundation of modern science. The early giants, Newton, Boyle, Kepler, they were doing science because they believed in a rational creator who made a rational universe.
He actually flips the script in a way that I found really provocative. He says that today, in 2026, it's often the atheists who are denying scientific facts to keep their worldview intact.
It's a bold claim, but look at the examples he gives. He points out that some atheists are really uncomfortable with the Big Bang Theory because it implies a beginning to the universe.
Right. If the universe has a beginning, it demands a cause.
A cause. And so you see people retreating into these eternal universe theories that the observational evidence just doesn't support.
Or the DNA code. He mentioned that some people deny that DNA is actually a code or information, because if you admit it's a code, you imply a coder.
Yes, it's the information problem. If you treat DNA as just random chemical interactions, you can avoid the design inference. But if you treat it as it actually functions, as a complex information storage and retrieval system, you are staring design right in the face. Sai believes that atheists are now the ones having to perform these mental gymnastics to avoid the obvious conclusions of the data.
He also talks about something called teleology. Now, that's a pretty fancy word. What does it mean in this context?
Teleology is the study of purpose. For a long, long time, biology has been allergic to the word purpose. The dogma was that evolution is blind, it's random, it's unguided. But Sai, and he's referencing work by paleobiologist Simon Conway Morris, argues that evolution isn't random at all. It has direction, it has constraints.
Like life keeps inventing the camera eye over and over. It keeps inventing wings. It seems to be going somewhere.
Exactly. Convergent evolution suggests there are laws governing biology that we haven't fully mapped out yet. Sai compares biology today to physics before Einstein. Physics was kind of stuck in a certain paradigm until Einstein came along with relativity. Sai thinks biology is currently stuck in strict materialism and needs a new paradigm one that allows for purpose and design to actually move forward.
So what he's saying is that bringing God back into the picture might actually make us better scientists.
Yes, because if there is a purpose and you're ignoring it, your science will always be incomplete. You're trying to explain a watch without acknowledging the concept of timekeeping. You might understand the gears, but you'll never understand why it exists in the first place.
That's such a compelling way to look at it. We've gone from a boy in a communist household who thought God was a fairy tale to a biochemist who saw the signature of a creator in the cell, to a man who found peace through a dream about letting go.
It's a journey from God is impossible to God is inevitable. And the driver of that journey was just an honest look at the evidence. Garter didn't check his brain at the door of the church. He used his brain to find the door.
And I think that's the big takeaway here. If you're listening to this and you feel like you're standing on that cliff, maybe you're skeptical, maybe you're afraid that faith means abandoning reason. Sai's story is a permission slip to just let go.
Absolutely. The cliff you're clinging to might just be an illusion.
I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. Sai dreamt he was hanging from a cliff, terrified that letting go meant death. But when he let go, he realized the world was just turned the wrong way. He was actually safe on the ground the whole time. Think about your own intellectual barriers. What is the cliff you're holding on to? Is it a belief that matter is all there is? Is it a fear of what others might think? What if the struggle isn't about climbing up to find the truth, but simply letting go of the assumption that you have to figure it all out alone?
Sometimes the ground is closer than you think.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.